What's up, my gamers? We got an exciting...
What are you doing?
I'm relating to the audience.
Who do you think watches this?
Anyone preparing for the battlefield of the future. Today.
Alright, I got a confession to make. Every year, like a moth to a flame, I am drawn to the Infinity booth at Adepticon. I don't know what it is, but this game is just a bit of me. The art style, the faction design, amazing diorama-style battle maps that make the action feel so much more epic and energetic, and everyone I talk to seems to say it's an awesome game to play. I've been slowly collecting a JSA army force for a couple of years now, and when Corvus Belli, the creators of Infinity, reached out wanting to work together, I thought, perfect. Now I can really dig into the game, start working on my army, and really figure out what makes this game so cool. Infinity's setting features gnarly aliens, AI intelligence, as well as a wide variety of factions of man that inhabit both Earth and a wide variety of other settled planets. And while I love the look of a ton of the factions in this game, JSA particularly appeals to me because of its traditional roots in Japanese art and style, and they wield katanas. Plus, the design integrates this awesome technological side for far future militaristic warfare. Also, I can't think of anything I'd rather play than a bunch of samurai, ninjas, and big sweet mechs. Which is exactly what I'll be working on today. This is Daiokai, and as you can see, Infinity models are actually made of white metal. But they're not the soft, undetailed metal minis of old. Oh no, these things are super crisp and the pieces fit together precisely. You know, I think metal minis oftentimes get a bad rap because we're used to the older, less sophisticated versions. Plus, because they're so shiny, it's kind of hard to see how detailed and crisp the models are before you prime them. But the building process for these new metal minis is quite similar to plastic. A sprue cutter, a hobby blade, and my trusty flexible sanding sticks are all I need to get this thing ready to be glued together. And speaking of glue, I highly recommend Gorilla Super Glue Gel for gluing metal minis together. This stuff is insanely strong and it dries super fast. It's also basically the same price as every other super glue out there. Once this model was built, he did have a few tiny gaps that really are hardly noticeable to the naked eye, but when I have my footage zoomed in 4 times right now, they look a lot bigger. So all I did was rolled out some really thin green stuffed snakes and wedged those into place with my rubber-tipped clay shapers. Now, I'm a self-admitted mini building stickler. I take a lot of time to make sure there's no flash or mold lines in any of my models, so you really could skip this step entirely and your model would still look great when it's painted. And as we always do, we mixed more green stuff than needed to fill these gaps, so I just took that extra green stuff, squished it down on the base of the model, and pushed down some cracked concrete bits and rubble that I 3D printed to give us that ruined urban battlefield look. Now, because we're using super glue gel, we don't need to pin together any of the pieces of our model while building it to make it strong enough, but because this guy is pretty top heavy and big, I'm going to pin him to the base. Now, for my normal size minis, I don't do this, and I've got a little trick here. If I put a dot of paint on the bottom of each of the paper clips that I glued to the feet of my model, and then touch those paper clips right on the base where I want the model positioned, I've created 2 little dots, which I can then drill the holes to get the exact fit that I need. Now, another reason I'm really drawn to the art style and aesthetic of Infinity is the way it kind of dips its toe into this almost cyberpunk, synthwave artistic flavor. So painting up my JSA army with just basic base coats and flat colors doesn't appeal to me at all. You only need 10 or so models for your whole force in this game. So what the hell, let's just lean into it and go with the more bold, wild approach to painting this model. So my strategy is just to focus on color and light for this entire model, breaking free from a very regimented, boring paint-by-numbers style. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be a complex paint job or require any special painting techniques or tools. In fact, I'm going out of my way to cut out all the fat in the painting process just so I can focus on painting a bold samurai robot. And we're actually only going to use very few paints for this process as well, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. We'll use a bold imperial blue to paint the bottom facing surfaces, as well as the majority of the rear of the model. This is actually going to be the bounce reflection color for our armor to ensure the shadowy areas have depth, vibrance, and interest. For all of our upward-facing surfaces, we'll be using laser magenta. We'll be building on this warmth throughout the entire paint job, but we just need to sketch out the basic shapes and that warm tone for all the upward-facing surfaces. For both of these paints, I'm mixing them about 50-50 with water, so that very first coat over our black primer is going to kind of blend in a bit and to create an interesting shadow, and that's great. That's what we want. We can always come back in with 2 or 3 more thin layers in the areas we want a bit more vibrance in. The most important thing here is to not stress about this looking smooth or even very good right now. We're just slapping a foundation for the bold color scheme we've got coming up. You know, as I was looking through Infinity's website to get an idea of which models I wanted to add to my army and even some inspiration on their artwork on how to paint my own, I found myself digging into the free rules section on the page. Yeah, you heard that right. All the rules for this game are free on their website. Oh, and all the latest updates are put there in one clean place, so you aren't wasting time or wasting money on anything other than cool models you want to buy. Their army building software is also free, so I was able to mess around with making sure I could fit all of my favorite models and weaponry into my JSA force without having a monthly subscription to an app. All right, I'm done gushing over free rules and free army building apps from the makers of a game that's well established and competitive just because they want you to play their game instead of trying to find a way to siphon every possible dollar out of you. All right, now we're digging into the fun stuff here, bringing our model to life after just a few minutes of laying down those base tones. With a mid-tone gray mixed in with a bit of our pink or our blue base colors, we start to define the shapes and angles of all of this armor. You know, I've found that painting detailed, highly angular models like robots can be a bit overwhelming and often take a long time. So I'm trying to fast forward that process by accentuating these shapes instead of painting the entirety of each tiny detail fully with multiple coats. You'll notice that I'm keeping fairly sizable sections of this model unpainted in this first layering step, and that's because I'm going to lean on those undertones we've established to carry some weight for us throughout this paint job. And this speeds up our total paint time per model immensely. Now, it's really important that we define the edges, shapes, and angles here. They are what make the model look so badass. But those are the only things that we're doing. We make a maximum impact with minimal time. Now you'll notice when I get to painting the undersides where we used our blue base shadow color, I mix in a bit of that blue with the gray instead of the pink. And this is an easy way for us to build up that warm to cold contrast that we're going to work up with throughout the entire model. And it was at about this point in the painting process where I remembered that I was actually painting a metal model. Once the primer was on and the clean, crisp cast was there, I didn't really know, other than the fact that the model has got a nice, sturdy weight to it. Something about the weight of a metal model just feels so good when you're painting or playing a game. Now, one of the reasons I'm going with the approach that I am today and why I think it ends up looking so good is because this model has a lot going on. It's a mech. It's got a lot of armor plates. It has a lot of design elements that tie it into that samurai feel, and it needs those things to really stand out as a unique sculpt. But it also doesn't have a bunch of extra bullshit going on. Each detail seems thought out and restraint was used. There's no 17 belts, bandoliers, grenades, and handguns on this thing, and it's a better looking model because of it. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I sit down to paint a model, I'm not exactly confident that the way it's going to turn out is how I envision it in my head. And when I got to this point in painting this model, I started to feel a little bit of confidence in the direction that we were taking. I mean, heck, if I was in a rush, I could just call this guy done after this step, and this paint job would be done in under an hour. But I do really want this guy to stand out on the table and to have a lot more depth and interest going on, so we're going to start bringing back some of that color. So I'm going to thin down my original Imperial Blue and Laser Magenta with about 10 parts water to 1 part paint, and quickly glaze over the majority of those highlights that we just placed. My ultimate goal for this guy is to have this feel of an almost color shifting, chromatic, really vibrant armor. And in order to do that, we're going to need to bring back some of these colors and add some new interesting colors as well. Now, while I'm doing this glazing, I want to make sure I'm pulling the brush from the highlighted areas into the shadows so that the majority of the paint that's deposited on the model happens in those darker areas. This gives us a smoother transition between our highlights and our shadows while we're building back that color. Now, as we move on to the next step, I've got great news. You already know how to do this because we just did it before. We're just going to amplify everything we've done a second time. The only difference is this time we're using a slightly lighter gray and we're covering smaller sections of our highlighted area. This painting style is kind of doing the same thing as many times as you want until you're happy with the results. But I'd encourage you to keep pushing brighter than you think you need to go. And I know this may seem like a stark jump up in brightness, but we need to push this if we're going to continue to bring back in more color and drama. If we don't go bright enough on these grays, the model is not going to stand out on the tabletop. Also, and even way more importantly, what we're doing here is amazing practice for you to understand how light works and how to place light on your models. Because if you can consistently represent light, angle, and intensity on all of the variety of shapes on your mini, you will be improving as a painter. And because we aren't worried about painting each different part of the model a different color, we're going to improve quicker because we're just focusing on that one aspect. Now, because we're tightening the amount of model we're highlighting here, I really want to make sure that enough of that first highlight is still showing across the model. I'm not worried about blending where these layers meet, of course. Our color glazes will take care of that for us soon enough. It's also important that you understand how much light and bright areas should be on different parts of the model. As a basic rule of thumb, I always highlight the head and shoulders and chest regions much more than the midsection, and then as you get closer to the feet, those areas have fewer and fewer brighter areas. Now, for our second color glaze pass through, I mix in a bit of yellow orange ink to our magenta to add more depth and warmth as the highlights build. This ends up getting closer to that chromatic feel we're going for because for the first time we were pulling away from just the blues, magentas, and grays that we used thus far. It's wild to see how much just a touch of this yellow brings the model to life. Seriously, if you don't own one, I highly recommend picking up a bottle of yellow orange ink to have in your painting kit. By just mixing in a touch of this to any highlight color that you're using will give you that warm, sun-kissed feel on any surface of your model. And at this point, I feel like the armor for my Daiokai is complete, which means I need to follow my own advice and do one more round of highlights. And while Painting John is working on that, I get to brush up on my Infinity lore. For instance, did you know that this powered armor suit was named Daiokai because of its dominance in tight corridor combat? Other soldiers who saw it in action began whispering stories of the Great Demon on the battlefield, and Daiokai is Japanese for Great Demon. Hence, the prototype suit was named. I can picture it now. A tight, dimly lit factory corridor. From the darkness, a tactical flashlight rounds the corner to illuminate a hallway, and standing there, now shining brilliant in that sole beam of light, is the chromatic Great Demon. All right, that's it. I am ready to play this game. But before I can start rolling some dice, I need to finish off this great demon here with a vibrant bang, an accent color to make him sing. So let's sketch in a few rough highlights of light reflection on the blades of his katanas. Now these don't need to be perfect by any means. Just sketch one larger highlight and then one or two smaller ones around it. It's important to note that these shouldn't be perfectly straight lined highlights. They need to be slightly wider towards the tip of each side of the blade to show how light pulls itself over slightly curved surfaces. I'll then go back in with a second brighter highlight to push that light even further. Here I'm using pure white very selectively to accentuate the blade edge and the innermost portion of the highlight. We then come in with a fluorescent pink over the entirety of the blade. Now I'm using an airbrush here because it gives me a nice even coat, and fluorescent paint is well known to not cover very well, but you could certainly use a standard brush in 3 or 4 coats. I also use the fluorescent pink to illuminate the symbols on his back flappies. I know these things probably have an official name, but I'm just gonna go with back flappies. Now when it comes to the base of this model, I don't want to spend a ton of time here. I do want to keep a bit of that atmosphere and the color in place though, so I'm just going to go around all the concrete and rubble details with one highlight of a brownish gray to define their shapes. From there I add my favorite rust in a bottle in Dirty Down Rust and a bit of pigment powder to create even more contrast to our shining demon, and then he'll be ready for the battlefield. And with that, our great demon is complete. And my God, this was so much fun. And I'm not just saying that. I really enjoyed painting this model, and it excites me even more to continue on in the rest of my Infinity army. Painting this model reminded me that there are so many games out there that have unique, fun to paint models, and they have really cool games that are associated with them. And painting a model for a new game, something that gets you excited, or just one you picked up off the shelf, is a great excuse to break all of those barriers we've set up on ourselves as painters. Just try something wild, try something different, try something you've never done before. For this guy, I wasn't held back by how I think this model was supposed to be painted. I didn't feel bad about using 5 paints for the whole thing, and I'm excited to see this guy in action with the rest of his squad on the table. And as we're wrapping up here today, I want to give a sincere thank you to Corvus Belli, the creators of Infinity, for partnering with me and sponsoring today's video. In collaborating with them, it was really apparent to me how much passion for model making, designing, and game design these folks have. Not only is there an awesome looking animated series for Infinity coming soon, but they also support the community with things like an online mini painting competition that happens to be going on right now. And if you've never played or painted Infinity, there's no time like the present. Whether you want to jump in and join the miniature painting competition, no matter what your experience level is, or you just want to pick up a couple models to paint and play with. I got a link down in the video description to the Infinity website so you can check out the lore, all the rules, the army building app, all the factions, and all the amazing models, many of which are on sale right now, so go give Corvus Belli some love. And finally, a massive thank you to all the Ninjon patrons. It's because of you I can keep making these videos and do them on models and games that I love, and your recommendations for new stuff I need to try. You also get some sweet perks by joining the Patreon, like hanging out in the Discord server and calling me Daiokai. Reminds me I need to change my title on the server. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to the painting desk and keep working on the next video, where I'm going to be focusing on a game and models I also love. Sometime between now and then, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.
You can run straight into a brick wall with this thing on. Here. It's so quiet in my brain when I close these things. Smells like gasoline and testosterone in here now. You're welcome.